So welcome to our first Perspective virtual webinar in honor of Black History Month, the impact of sex trafficking on African American women and girls. Today, our moderator will be Ms. Yolanda Pouchot, panelists Chanel Dion, Open Doors Network Survivor Mentor, and Marie Norman, Open Doors Network Regional Advocate. Before we get started, if you have any questions related to Open Doors, Voices from Florida, or housing, please put those in the chat. And I turn this now over to Ms. Yolanda Pouchot.
Hello, everybody. My name is Yolanda Pouchot, and I am so excited to be here with you this morning. I am the owner of Yolanda Speaks. I provide diversity and inclusion training and wellness training for mostly not-for-profits. Before we get started and really get energized around this conversation, I'd like for us to just take a minute and do a very, very brief relaxation exercise. Really, it's designed, and I think it's so important that we begin to think about how our own wellness impacts the kind of service that we provide for others. And so if you feel safe enough, and I know that for some people they may not, but if you feel safe enough, close your eyes and I will guide you through just relaxing. If you don't, see if you can find a spot ahead of you, maybe look down toward the ground and just look at that and see if you can get relaxed. So just kind of sit with I'm going to close my eyes, but just see if you can sit with your hands in your lap and be upright, not tight, but upright like a willow, not an oak, and just follow my words. So first, intend to relax. Now focus your attention on your scalp and just relax your scalp. Relax your forehead, your eyebrows, your eye sockets, your eyelashes. Relax your nose, your lips, your tongue, your chin. Relax your neck. Just relax. Relax your arms, your elbows, your lower arms. Relax every single one of your fingers. Relax your chest, your belly, your bottom. Relax your spine. Relax your thighs, your knees, your legs, your ankles, your feet, your toes. And in this relaxed state, be aware of the freedom and the agency that you have right now. And part of the reason why we're coming together is because we want to put all of our creativity, all our productivity into solving the problem of commercial sex trafficking. So in a relaxed, intelligent, wise state, let's have this conversation. So tell us a little bit about what you do and why you do it. Let's start with Marie.
So, hi everyone, my name is Marie Norman. So in terms of what I do on the Open Doors team and with the Dolores Barr Weaver Policy Center, I work, my position on the team is a regional advocate. And so that means that I work to support the rest of our team members, our survivor mentors and our clinicians, and then also the individuals and the families that we work with to provide different resources to make sure that I am just making connections within the community, to make sure that those that we serve have what they need and can have their needs met in that way. And so that is a bulk of what I do. Also training in the community, different speaking engagement, things like that. So that's what I do. Now, the why I do this work is what I wanted to get to more so. Why I do this work is because although I am not a survivor of sex trafficking myself, I am a survivor of many other things that disproportionately affect African-American women or Black women. And I do not want for any one of my experiences to be in vain. Nothing that I've ever gone through in my life will ever be in vain, because I'm going to use every experience that I have had to reach back and help someone else, to be the person that I needed growing up, that I needed as a young adult. And so, and as I reflected on that question, that is just what kept coming up, in my heart. And so really, that is why I'm involved in this work.
I like that you said that, because I immediately thought about Sankofa. Do you know that symbol? The Sankofa symbol of the bird that's looking back? All right.
I've not seen it.
You will here in a minute. All right, Chanel,
Okay.
Thank you so much, Marie. Chanel, tell us about what you do and why.
So I work alongside Marie and the rest of the team on the Open Doors Outreach Network team here in Jacksonville, Florida. So as a survivor mentor, that just means that I provide care, crisis management, court advocacy to survivors and victims of trafficking between the ages of 10 to 24. And then Voices for Florida, they serve as the backbone agency to all of the networks and regions that we serve. So currently we cover, I believe it's 20 counties within the Florida region. And so there's different agencies within those regions who support survivors working for the, as we work with the Open Doors Outreach Network team. And so the why, for me, as a survivor of trafficking, I could just remember for myself, it was just very hard for me to get to a place where I felt like I was worthy of a new start. And so throughout my journey, I just kept coming into contact with other survivors, other victims that were victimized during the time that I was trafficked. And I made a promise to myself, and I made a promise to them that I would, find us a way out. And for me, a big piece of that has been raising awareness and letting it be known, exactly what trafficking can and does look like for women and girls, Black women and girls specifically, because a lot of the times I think there's the way that trafficking has been portrayed is not always accurate to what we actually see here in our communities today. And so for me, it's just very big and important that I highlight and bring awareness to this crime.
Thank y'all so much. I really appreciate it. And, and being so tenderhearted to share with us about being a survivor. And I'm just going to add to that, that I'm a survivor of multiple assaults, sexual assaults. And part of why I do this work is because I've just had so much relief in healing, right? And I really like being able to share with people how horrible and wonderful the healing process is. So thank you so much. I just feel so honored to be having this conversation with you. So let's get to our first question. You've seen it. There's a statistic, right? And it is victims of sexual abuse are 28 times more likely to be arrested for prostitution. Now, that was one of our first questions, but I also wonder if you could tie prostitution in with sex trafficking. Why do we keep seeing things about youth prostitution alongside sex trafficking? Can y'all illuminate that for us a little bit? Either one of you. Marie.
And I was going to say, Chanel. No. So getting back to the first part of your question, which was victims of sexual abuse are 28 times more likely to be arrested for prostitution. So that part, and I'll start off just speaking to that part. I think that we tend to have this notion, and Chanel kind of touched on this too, of what a victim looks like. So or have this notion of a good victim. And a lot of the times, this good victim that we see does not really look like what you and I look like, or what we look like. So when a victim comes to mind, it may be an individual that has fair skin or lighter skin, blue eyes, blonde hair, the image that you maybe see from the movie Taken. But when they see us, which is truly, what the victim looks like most of the time, statistically, we're we're more likely to be looked at as a prostitute or something like that. So there's a lot of issues surrounding, you know, what a victim looks like, and then, you know, what we look like as maybe non-conforming victims, right? So they're labeled as runaways a lot of the time, prostitute. Those individuals, juveniles, whether they be juvenile or adults, the marginalized individuals who have been pushed away to the margins of society. And so I think a lot of the times, even though we are being victimized, we are still being labeled as prostitutes, runaways, and these things, and that's affecting the care and concern that is offered to us.
Okay. Did you want to say something about that, Chanel?
I guess I just want to add, I think she pretty much covered it, but I'll just add a small piece. I think for me, when I hear that victims of sexual abuse are 28 more times likely to be arrested for prostitution, what I hear and what we often see in our work is that a lot of the times victims are continuously being criminalized versus being supported. And I think a lot of it goes back to our history and the way that women and girls, specifically Black women and girls, are oftentimes perceived. A lot of the times I think that they coined the word prostitution to signify choice, because a lot of times when you think of prostitution, you connect it to the word choice, that someone is choosing to be that way, to prostitute themselves, as they say, when in fact we do know that children cannot consent to prostitution or to selling themselves. So a lot of the times I think that we see that number is because we are not perceived as victims. We are perceived as criminals.
And that is so important. I really do want to talk about that, especially when we start talking about the structural I. Like, how can a structure have an I? But I think based on what you've said, maybe we could use a little bit more clarity about what is sex trafficking, and maybe one or two ways, because one of the things you mentioned, Marie, is that maybe there's a narrative, and maybe that narrative is like victim and perpetrator, and maybe it's more complicated than that. But in your own words, what is it, and what are some of the things that we may be missing in terms of how we identify a person as being a victim versus someone who really is making a choice for her life outside of her age or his age? I can let Chanel go first. You gotta be ready. I know I didn't write that question, but I do think that that's really so important. What are the different ways that qualify as sex trafficking?
So anytime that there is any type of sex act involving an exchange of a good, then to me, I label that and define that as sex trafficking. Now, when it's an adult, I know by law, they say that there has to be a level of force, fraud, and coercion there in order for it to be defined as sex trafficking. A lot of the times, I think people don't really highlight the importance of how money can act as a coercive tool. So a lot of the times when someone is, you know, coming from a poverty background, homelessness, they are without and they are seeking to fill a need. A lot of the times, this is often the reason why a lot of time people are coerced into being trafficked. A lot of the times when we talk about trafficking, we only highlight force, and then people will say, well, you know, if they weren't forced, then it's not trafficking. But sex trafficking does not just only entail force. Fraud and coercion is there as well. So a lot of the times these traffickers today, they're perceiving themselves to be boyfriends to the victims. And so because there's this twist on words and how the predators are preying on women and girls, a lot of the times we fail to truly identify someone as a victim. I know there are times when we may hear people say that, well, this is something that I chose. A lot of the times they leave out that they didn't have any other choices readily available to them. And so it's hardly ever a choice if you don't have multiple options to choose from.
Yeah, false choices. False choices. Yeah. But I really think that we need to highlight, and especially for those of us who are listening, is we already see this reoccurring theme of the collective lenses. And I think that those collective lenses are about the way we are perceived from the dominant group, or, you know, from white people. It's also about the way that we have internalized some of the derogatory things we think about Black women and sexuality and sexual expression. And that lens is what I think needs cleansing the most. And the question becomes, how do we do that, right? That's not the question for you, Marie. The question for you is, talk to us about what you see as alternative narratives to sex trafficking, and then we'll talk about this other thing. Are you there, Marie? I think we may have lost Marie for a little bit, so hopefully she'll come back. So you and I are going to have to talk. We got to roll with it. I thought I saw you for just a minute looking down, and so even for those of you who are out there, try not to text the ladies directly if that's possible. But even if they do, don't look at it. We'll go to the chat questions, you know, at the end. So Marie, are you with us? Do you want to answer that?
You know what? My internet cut out just now, so I missed a lot of that. Gotta love technology.
Okay.
Repeating the question.
I just want you to just tell us what sex trafficking is. And we were talking about alternative narratives. Like a lot of people see sex trafficking as this, you know, person that might grab a young woman and lock her up in a room and just have, you know, perpetrators, in my opinion, come in over and over again. And it's not that simple. And that might be the case at times. So we're just really trying to see if we can expand on the way we see the phenomena. Did she leave us again?
I'll start, and then Marie can come in when she gets everything worked out. And so I think some of those narratives, let's see. So I have clients that I have worked with that have been trafficked through their family members. So a lot of the times their fathers are trafficking them for drugs. And so you're not seeing a girl or a person being locked in a room and being forced to do something. A lot of the times these children are believing that they're helping their families, they're helping their parents. And so they are, you know, setting up these online calls, having their children, you know, meet up and do sexual acts with adult males to provide a means for the family. And sometimes that means is food, sometimes it's drugs, and other goods. There has been instances where people are introduced through to trafficking through just someone that they meet. A lot of the times our girls, they walk home from school and they're meeting people who are, you know, just asking them for a ride, telling them they're going to give them a ride home, and, you know, building this relationship. And a lot of the times the children begin to trust this person and think it's someone that they can confide in. And then they, you know, they share something that they're struggling with. And so a lot of the times the trafficker will feed into that. And then it's, you know, they think this person loves me, this person cares about me. And then, you know, one thing leads to another. They invite them to a party or invite them out, introduces them to drugs, sometimes get them hooked on a certain substance. And then a lot of the times they switch it, and they, you know, it's just like the flick of a switch. You know, they think that they care about them. They're doing all these things. And then in return, they end up having to say, okay, well, now you got to pay me back. And then this is how you are being forced to pay me back.
Hold on a second. I want to expand on that. I think we have Marie back. One of the things that I hear a lot, in my work as a diversity and inclusion trainer is that it's a lot of times it is the family. And I just saw something come up about the family earlier. And so I do want to talk about the ways, especially with these phenomena, Jezebel, Mammy, and Sapphire, which we've talked about. Our audiences might not be as familiar with it. I do want to talk about that from a structural perspective. But a lot of times people say, you know, it really is, it's not the schools, it's the Black family. And so I do want to talk about just a minute about whatever comes up for you organically about foster care, respectability, politics in the Black community, and the kind of desperation, I think, that Chanel described, poverty, I just talk about that. And there's one last thing that comes up so much in our conversations with just African-American women, this phenomena of the fast ass girl and how that plays into the way we see each other. So that's a lot, but pull up whatever comes up for you organically, Marie.
So that is a lot. You're right. But just I was stuck on the comment that you made about the Jezebel or this temptress or seductress. And then also tying that into how we see each other in the Black community, or the fast girl. There's a lot of time, and I brought this up before, like, where did that perception come from? Where did that perception come from that Black girls are fast girls, and why have we adopted that onto as our own, so to speak? And so a lot of the times I think, that goes back to the history of the United States, the colonization, the slave trade, just tying that in. For me, when you think about the fast girl, my brain always goes back to what I have heard of about the fancy girl slave trade, where they took younger girls, and this was the slave trade, or this was the type of slave trade where these girls were marketed toward what the buyer, which was, the white male, what they wanted. So they would dress them up however, they perceived that that the buyer wanted, and they were sold in that way. And so a lot of the time, also Black girls are, there was a research done, I think it was called Childhood Interrupted, where they talked about how society views Black girls as needing less nurturing, less care, less protection than their white counterparts. So if you think about that, individuals are already perceiving young Black girls as grown.
But now, wait a minute, the first time we hear grown is where, though? Where do we hear grown? Who does grown, you so grown, come from the first time?
I don't know who it comes from the first
Grandma?
time. I know who uses it a lot now. I know who uses it a lot now. We have adopted that as our own. We see a girl dressed in, whatever she might be dressed in. And a lot of the times we look, and we might have to check ourselves because, oh, she's grown. Oh, she's fast. Oh, look at her.
But I think I want to hear what you have to say, Chanel, but I think it's interesting as a person who loves words so much, when you say to a little girl, you're so grown, we're basically saying, you are an adult. And I do think it is our responsibility as African-American women who have experienced some relief to be extraordinarily gentle and kind and loving to other Black women and other Black children. That is the balm in Gilead that I think that is so missing for many of us. Chanel.
I was just going to add that a lot of times when we hear those labels, I think sometimes that we have, we take on the perception that, other races, white people specifically, have really coined for us. And so we've internalized it.
That's right.
And so because we have done that, I think a lot of times when you think of like the fast girl, you think of the word prostitution, that takes away our responsibility to care, to nurture and protect, because now we're saying you're choosing to be fast, you're choosing to be this way, you're choosing to prostitute yourself. And so then that takes away our responsibility to care, our responsibility to protect and nurture, and it's not okay.
Yeah. And so as we were going through, I know, hey, quickly, because we got to do one more. Our time is so great.
It's a judgment. It's a judgment, and we have to get away. We have to get away from that. And like Chanel was saying, we have to exercise more care and concern.
And so I think, already we're kind of getting so close to that mark. But I do want to talk about, before we really start talking about structures, because I think that African Americans have internalized that, and probably other people of color have internalized some of these myths about hypersexuality in African American women. But I also think that it's important to, as you were saying, Marie, look structurally at 300 plus years of enslavement, 89 years of Jim Crow, and now this new Jim Crow. So the dominant culture has had an investment in the rape, torture, and abuse of African American women for centuries. And that is the macro reality that I think that we have to be aware of simultaneously to the kind of micro expressions that we are seeing, like in the family, if that makes sense, right? So any of that you want to speak to, Chanel? Wait, who said something last? I want to make sure we kind of keep it balanced. But I want to talk about trauma before we talk about structures, though. I want to talk about trauma. I'm going to throw out a lot of stuff and you grab whatever you like. But I want to talk about trauma. I want to talk about historical trauma. If you've been keeping up in it a little bit on epigenetics and this idea that we may have passed trauma down historically, I think that's interesting. ACE scores, all those things. Talk about trauma and African American women and girls. Keep it in mind that all three of us have just admitted to being on some level traumatized. What are we going to do about the trauma?
I think what we first have to do is really start identifying what trauma really looks like and the impact that it has on our brains, on our bodies, how we, respond to life. Because a lot of the times, the way that trauma manifests itself, a lot of times in our work, we see people misidentifying, not even identifying what the girl or woman may be going through as a trauma response. We're labeling it as bad, we're criminalizing them, and we're not identifying that there's something deeply rooted here. And that deeply root is she's been traumatized, and this is her reaction to that trauma. This is how this trauma has now impacted her. This is how this trauma has impacted her brain and how she responds to life.
And so I just want to throw this out quickly too, because we were talking about Jezebel, but this is a little bit about how Sapphire comes in too, because a lot of times our girls express that differently, like angry, attitude. One of the things that we're accused of at every stage of our existence is attitude, right? And our girls as early as 11 be like, get off me. I mean, they really, and that rage and anger, I think, is also a manifestation of feeling powerless and traumatized at the same time.
Correct.
I agree. I completely agree with that. Chanel, I'm going to jump back to something that Chanel said, just that what we see in our work a lot of the times is that people may be able to identify someone has been traumatized. And even in that identification, they're still not allowed the space to really manifest or feel all of the feelings that comes from a person that has been traumatized. So leading into the Sapphire concept, feeling anger, rage, and all of that, those are emotions that anybody that has been victimized, traumatized, that's a normal emotion, right? So we should be allowed to feel those feelings. But it's like those feelings, especially with Black women, have to be held at bay or held back so much, and they have to be taken in on the inside. And so not even considering what holding that in does to our bodies internally. So on top of the trauma, you now have the added stress of holding all of this anger in, and you wonder why people have hypertension, why it runs higher in our communities, gastrointestinal issues. All of these issues are because we are holding all of this stress inside of our body and are not allowed to have in an expression of our anger, because then we're seen as the angry Black woman, or, you know, whatever other term you can think of when we have an expression of anger that is justified. That's righteous indignation. We're allowed to feel that way. We're allowed to be upset and angry.
That's interesting. That's very, very interesting. You know, and I think that it's so fascinating, because I think that's true. And like, what's underneath that? And I think that's what we also need. Like, I was sharing with somebody the other day about a training that I'm creating called Hurt. And part of the reason why I titled it Hurt is because I do know how to be, you know, it's angry, but underneath that it's like hurt, because when I see, as we start, because I want us to talk about this structurally, I want you to speak to this. When I look at the history of African-American women, just African-American women, from enslavement, where we're talking about state-sanctioned rape, torture, birth exploitation, right? We had 300 years of that. And then Jim Crow. We're talking about murders, sharecropping, destruction of property, hangings, right? When you really start teasing this out, it wasn't until the 1970s that we really, even in our bodies, as Black people, began to have agency. I think that's one of the first times that Black women were able to accuse anybody of rape, right? So agency in our bodies. So yes, it's us. But I want us to talk about how historical racism, bondage, 300 years of work for no money. It's like, if we didn't have the money, that's one thing, but on top of not receiving money for the work, we received the torture and the rape. And the children. And I don't think that we feel that enough either. That a lot of what we are experiencing is an outcrop of what has happened to us. It's simultaneous. It's personal responsibility, but it's also structural responsibility. That this is a structural conversation that the African-American woman has given quite a bit to this country, and that justice demands that we take the foot off her neck and begin to clean up our lenses and the way that we see us. And so from that perspective, I want to talk about the police. I want to talk about the lenses of the police and sex trafficking and victimization and Johns and history, all that, whatever comes up for you. Chanel.
So initially,
okay, Marie. I was looking at Marie and then saying Chanel. Okay, Marie, go.
I was gonna say, so initially, so many different things came up for me while you were speaking. One of the first things that came up, though, you mentioned, you know, all of the historic trauma that we've been through, you know, for no money. But what my thought was, but there is no amount of money that could justify the rape and the torture and the different things that have been done to our bodies. There's no justification for that. And then my mind went to Recy Taylor, and I think you and I had spoken about that, Yolanda, before. But this individual who was raped, a Black woman in Alabama, was in 1944. Raped by 6 white men. The driver of the car that was carrying these white men gave a confession, said that, you know, that this did happen. The men said that it happened, and these men, she took, Recy Taylor actually did bring up charges. She did file charges against them, and there were no consequences, pretty much. A small fine was given, and even in that, they threw the money at her feet, as if to say, well, now we paid for what we did to you, as if the money, you know, could really take back the trauma that she had just experienced, or justify the trauma that her body had gone through. being raped by 6 different men, having death threats on her life because she took a stand and tried to demand justice for herself, and then the slap in the face of they were acquitted, essentially. So
let me just say this about enslavement, though, because I think why this is important, all of us look up HR 40, the reparations bill. Why that is important is because people who look like us are here because, for capitalism. I mean, so in a capitalistic society, torture aside, resources for healing, right? So here we are being tortured and working. And that's what I think is so fascinating about the African-American woman's body. Unlike any other in this country, birth exploitation, sexual exploitation, all legal. Work exploitation, all legal. And so how does a country go from, and I think that is really what's happening with us racially anyway, we have all this collective trauma and we think we can just talk our way through it. We're gonna have to feel our way through some of this, right? And it's not just African Americans. A lot of it is what has happened to us collectively. So do you want to say something about the police, Chanel?
Yes. So a lot of different emotions and feelings come to mind when we talk about the police. I think there is some level of anger there for me, and also still a level of hope, because in my work I am seeing a lot of officers being open to making some changes. I was in another training, and they had brought up the idea of ensuring and implementing that during the when they go through the police academy, that they start incorporating human trafficking trainings so very early on in their career as a police officer, because we know historically that a lot of the times police officers, even still today, are involved in the trafficking of women and girls, people. And so because they play that part, a lot of the times it's easier for them to criminalize versus help as well, because when you help, you also not only have to help this person, but you may end up having to expose yourself, having to expose your peers, your colleagues for the crimes that they are committing against people who are being trafficked. So I do believe that there is hope. I do see that they are making some changes and being more open to even seeing what exactly trafficking really looks like. And my hope is that one day that we will do away with this term of prostitution and really call it out for what it truly is, and this victimization. People are being preyed on and being victimized because of these predators, these buyers. So again, I like I said, many emotions come to mind. There's some anger still there, but again, there is some level of hope there as well, because I do see some changes slowly being made. But I do understand that this system, it benefits them. It benefits, a lot of those officers and, sergeants and all those things. So this is going to take a lot of work.
I appreciate you saying that like that too. I don't know. I just feel like that's part, what you just expressed, I think, is part of the beauty of Africa. We're talking about African-American women. I think most people are beautiful, but I'm just going to focus on that. Is this kind of resilience, and this hope that you just expressed. And I'm sure if I felt it, that other people felt that, right? And I think more than anything that police really need to look at the kind of things that we're talking about, like, how does Jezebel affect my seeing? What do I see when I see Black women?
Mm-hmm.
What do I see when I see Black children? I think all of us should be asking ourselves that question because of where we are in this country right now. But thank you so much for that. We are almost at the place where we're going to take comments, but I do want you to talk a little bit about your organization and how you see the possibilities for advancement and enrichment, and your the freedom for you to be creative at your work. And do you think the leadership is diverse? Let's talk about that.
I would say that our current organization, Chanel and I both work for the Dolores Barr Weaver Policy Center. And I do see the opportunity, you know, I think that we are moving in the right direction. I do see, you know, our president and CEO, Vicky Basra, is a woman of color. And when I say color, I'm not talking about Black, but, you know, she is Indian. And I love to see the diversity. And I know that she is invested in developing other leaders. So I know that there is an investment there to develop us to the place where we could one day be CEOs, president and CEOs, or we can move up, you know, in the within the organization to different management levels and things like that. And so it's very needful. We need to learn the skills. One of the things I have always known about or always felt about good leaders is that good leaders develop other leaders. And that trend needs to continue on, especially in the Black community or with African American females in particular. We need to see more representation. We need to see more individuals in higher level positions that look like us, that can relate to us, that can relate to the things that we go through in the workforce or in the workplace. And so, yeah, I definitely do feel as though our organization is taking steps in the right direction, you know, to make sure that there is representation.
I think especially in those areas where African American women are disproportionately affected, that the leadership, the creative energy that goes into solutions needs to be multicultural. Chanel, do you want to say something about that?
No, I really I agree with everything that Marie was saying, and I do see a lot of the work in our organizations where we are given the opportunity to have a voice, to be at the tables, to be in the rooms, when we are having discussions and being creative about how to, you know, move forward with policy making and going out to Tallahassee and speaking during legislative sessions to ensure that they see that we are here, that we are valuable, and we see that there is a very high need to support women and girls of color and who are impacted by trafficking. And they have definitely expanded and given us those opportunities. So I don't feel like, you know, these laws are being implemented without our voices being heard today.
So time is a social construct, but it looks like we got 1 minute. Oh, I'm so glad you got that joke. Okay, so Deborah is going to come in. I don't know if we got a lot of questions.
So we don't have a whole lot of questions, Yolanda. I think one of the questions is for Chanel, and the president of the Bauer Human Trafficking Coalition wanted your contact information and said she would follow up with you. But then there's another question here: what are the stats of African American sex trafficking victims? What I told them is we're going to be sending them out a host of stats after the webinar that speak to that. Do you all want to speak to any of the stats, Yolanda, about the African American victims? Do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, I mean, do either of you, because what's on the top of my mind when we start talking about disproportionality, right? That 40% sex traffic number is the thing that really stood out for me. And we've already talked about prostitution, but I don't know who asked that question, but if y'all want to say something about that 40% number, I think that's why we're having this conversation, because disproportionately, you know, African Americans in this nation make up about 13, if you're being liberal, 13% of the population, right? Tallahassee is a little bit different. We make about 30% in Tallahassee, but still, you know, half of those maybe are women. So what, you know, 8% of the population, 40% of those sex trafficked? That's pretty incredible. It's very much like, you know,
it's heartening.
Yeah, it is disheartening. So since we didn't have a lot of questions from Deborah, do you have anything else you want to ask? Because we can just finish the questions that we have.
No, I want them to, you sort of touched on it. The statistics regarding the number of African-American girls who are in foster care and the frequency at which they run away, which makes them at higher risk for trafficking.
Okay,
Can
all
you
right,
all speak
right.
to that?
Yeah. Yeah, of course. Which one of y'all want to speak to that first? Let's talk about foster care. So that was her question. Her question was, talk about the relationship between foster care and sex trafficking.
I think for the girls that we work with today, we have quite a few of girls on our care load now that are, they are in foster care, and they have also been either verified as victims of human trafficking by DCF, or it's been highly suspected. And I think that what I've personally seen is, you know, a lot of those girls, a majority of them are girls of color. And the reason I think that it is that way is because it starts way back in history when while we've already highlighted and talked a lot about it, you know, this Jezebel spirit in slavery. And really, to me, it's just how women and girls, specifically Black girls, are perceived by society. And a lot of the times, I've been reading a lot about the adultification of girls, and a lot of the times we're seeing children being seen as adults. And so I think Marie touched on that already, is that, you know, it just means that a lot of the times people are assuming that these girls should be more independent, that they're already adults, that they're making all these decisions on their own, and they don't need the support of the community, when in fact they do. They are still children, regardless of how we perceive them, regardless of what they have gone through. They are children, and they deserve to be cared for. And a lot of the times in the system, they are continuing to be failed. And a lot of the times when we fail them, we turn our backs on them. Who has their door open? Traffickers, predators. They are waiting for us to give up on them. And so for me, in my work, I try I don't, like, there is not one that I have given up on, turn my back on. There are times when we may have to close out a girl because we haven't made contact in 30 days, but they always know that our doors, the whole reason why they came up with the name Open Doors Outreach Network, is that our doors are always open, is that we are never turning our back on a child, on a person, because we know that there is hope for everyone. And so for me, I just think that a lot of the times these children, they need someone to be consistent and someone to keep showing up, and they don't have that. Their families fail them, then they come into care and they're also being failed again. And it's not okay. But we're justifying it by labeling them as, oh, well, she's fast and this is what she wants to do. She's prostituting herself. When she's a child, she cannot consent.
And I think that is so, it's complicated because we are a simple people. We like, simple realities, but it's such a fascinating history when you start reading the journals of the European white men who first went to Africa, and their views of Black women then. And there's tons and tons of literature about what white men wrote about Black women while we were in enslavement. And so a lot of it is a very complex term called projection. How do you create a place where torturing, beating, and whatever is okay? It's not unique to African Americans. We saw the same thing with Jews. Anytime you want to mistreat a people, you have to come up with some type of justification. And so the justification for Black women has always been Black women want it.
Yes.
Since the first time they laid eyes on us, we wanted it as a justification of this historical rape. Yes, Chanel, I'm sorry, you go.
No, I was just, there's some questions that have come in the chat.
Yeah.
And
I saw Deborah show up, so I figured.
Yeah, I was getting ready to let you know. It's like I was waiting for Chanel to finish. So let me do this. Question from Taylor. What is the difference between sex work and human trafficking? In your estimation, the difference between sex work and human trafficking?
For me, I don't think that there is a difference between sex work and sex trafficking. I think both of them is sexual exploitation. There is a person that is being exploited. It is an act of a power over, because you fail to have something. I can fulfill your need by giving you money if you do this for me, which is normally a sex act. I think a lot of times we coin the word sex work because we, again, it helps to take off the responsibility for us to care and to intervene, and it becomes that thing over there. It becomes something that's happening over here that doesn't involve me, and that's okay because that's work. I've heard one of my, another survivor says that sex is not work and work is not sex. I agree with that. And that is why, for me, I think that they mean the same thing, but a lot of the times people are labeling is so important. And when we choose to label someone as being a sex worker, then it says that the responsibility is on them versus on us, and it's not okay. But for me, to me, it's the same thing. These are people that are being exploited.
Okay.
I agree.
Do you want to say something about that, Marie?
Yeah, I was just saying that I agree with Chanel in the same way that sex work, that sounds like, it makes it sound like it's a choice, right? Because a lot of people can choose what line of work they go into. And so again, there we have this where someone is actually being exploited, but we are trying to justify it and make it sound as if it's a choice. When in reality, those who are being exploited don't really have, it's a difference between having good choices and making good choices. Mm-hmm. A lot of people that find themselves involved or being exploited don't have good choices to begin with.
Deborah, were you raising your hand because you had a question?
No. We've got lots of questions in the chat.
All right. Give us another question, Deborah.
Okay. How do you feel about the bill that was passed in Tallahassee in regards with educating students about trafficking, and what else do you think we can do?
What can we do? Mm-hmm. I like to piggyback. I want to piggyback on that question too, because it folds into something that we talked about. One of our questions, which was, I want to say it. It was, tell us about alternative treatment and case management ideas or practices that you like, right? So see if you can fold that in a little bit with that. If not, just do it.
I have, obviously, we have heard about that bill, and I do believe that, education, prevention in the schools is obviously a great idea. And then to tie in what you were saying, Yolanda, how we go about that is important, because there has to be a level of cultural humility involved in that, so that we make sure that we are reaching everyone when we do that. A lot of time people when curriculums are made, they don't take into consideration cultural differences. And so while it may be something that, a white person or a white peer might be able to relate to, it's not so relevant to a Black student. And so I think a lot of the times, that's what you have. And when they're building those curriculums and integrating them into the schools, they really need to there does have to be a lot of consideration for cultural humility and cultural diversity. The other thing that I was thinking, different things, what was the question that you asked? I have it typed up, and I'm trying to make sure that
alternative
yes.
Case management or treatment possibilities, right?
Right. So different things that I have seen that I really have enjoyed is kind of this storytelling. And so I really love where individuals can explore and be able to creatively tell the parts of their story that they're comfortable sharing in like a creative arts type of way, whether that be expression through dance, whether that be expression through music. Music therapy, I feel, is just a lot of, and my brain is going in several different directions, but like, so music therapy, I know before when I was working with teens in foster care, they were allowed to express themselves through dance. There was a program that they were in. They were also allowed, they made up raps. They did, you know, they made up songs and wrote songs and different things like that. And the way that it grasped the hearts of our youth, of African-American youth, and the things that they came up with, it was just, I was floored, and it just, in a good way, to see the creative expression that came out of them and what could happen when we tapped into that part of them, so people could really see and hear their voices.
Okay, Janelle, you want to say something about that? Alternative.
No, Marie,
You don't have to.
she highlighted it because I was just going to speak on the music piece and the importance of that, and just how I have seen that work for some clients where they're able to kind of express themselves through rap music and through dance. I have really seen that be just a way to express themselves that has been helpful.
And I have to bring, I'm gonna get your question in just a minute, Deborah. But I have to bring this up. I usually don't like to talk about anybody's book but my own, but since I don't have one, I'm gonna have to talk about his. So the My Grandmother's Hands was written by an African-American trauma specialist. I love some of the very practical things he talked about in terms of healing the traumatized. That's not necessarily for children. But I think that what we might know that we don't want to say is a lot of us come to this work with our trauma, and we are at different levels of healing with our own trauma. And I think as we continue to burn off our own kind of what he would call, you know, bad anger or bad, you know, kind of harmful trauma, we release this kind of brilliance. But one of the things that he said that I love that y'all are talking about is Black people like to hum and sing. Right? Humming, drumming, being in circles, right? And so I think that we have to explore all of that. One of the things that came to my mind, Deborah, I see you. It's so funny to watch Deborah. So one of the things that came to my mind, I don't want to say, I don't know if it was O'Connor or whoever, but the first female on the Supreme Court, and some of the Supreme justices were saying that things came up that they wanted to consider that she knew just because she was a woman at the table, the conversation was different. And I think that in terms of leadership, African-American women need to be in leaderships where we are disproportionately affected so that these solutions can permeate all at every area, whatever those, being at the table, creating solutions with that in mind is absolutely, I think, essential. The songs, the rap, the moaning, maybe it works, maybe it doesn't work. But I think we have to continue to consider it. Deborah.
Lots of other questions. And some of these questions follow up on what you all are talking about in music. So I'm going to speak to that. What role do you think music artists play in the adultification and over-sexualization of our girls? That's the one question. And then there's another
one on top of that. Go ahead, Deborah.
Yeah. Where is it? Can you talk about more about the way the system adultifies and criminalizes Black girls by arresting, detaining, and ineligibility for alternative access for housing?
Okay, so we're not going to do those, Deborah, we're not going to do those together. We're going to look at that first one and kind of see if we can close that out. And that was, what was it? Do y'all remember? What was the first one, Deborah? They don't go together.
I think it had to do with
the adultification. Music and the adultification
yes.
and sexualization of
Let's
girls
talk about
and women.
the sexualizing of African American women in music. Since y'all brought up rap, bring it. Let's see. I like folk music.
I think that for me, the music industry, a lot of times it perpetuates a false narrative of what, you know, we call it being in the life, being in the games look like. And so a lot of the times, even today with some of my clients, I have had conversations with some of the older clients that are now aspiring to, you know, want to dance in the strip club, not knowing that a lot of the times the strip club is utilized as a gateway to exploitation of women. And so what a lot of the times the rap culture does, it just paints this false narrative. It gives you one side of the story. It doesn't give you the full picture of what it really looks like when someone is being trafficked. We glorify, we glamorize pimps are traffickers. And then we just create a false narrative. And by us creating this false narrative, a lot of the times our children, they're hearing this information, they're internalizing it, and they think that it's real, not knowing that, you know, that is not what that life truly looks like. It's so much more to the story. It's so much harm on your mind. It's so much harm on your body. When you get out, you having to live with that harm, with the trauma that you have went through and endured. And a lot of the time, again, it just the rap industry, it just creates a false narrative.
Mm-hmm. Marie?
Yeah, I would agree exactly with what Chanel said. They are painting, it's irresponsible to paint this picture, but not give the full picture. You're only showing one portion of it. You're only showing, you know, what some young people may perceive as what looks like fun. But really, you're not showing the other side of that coin, the other side where there's hurt and there's shame and there's guilt and there's people that have to work, you know, that have had this message ingrained into their head, into their psyche. They're not showing the road of someone's healing journey that they have to have after all of this happens. So we glorify this pimp culture. But you know, what happens even to the girls that are in those videos? What happens to them afterwards? So yeah, we need to do a better job, or they need to do a better job of really painting a full picture, but it's not pretty.
Well, you know, I just saw, I saw a question come up that was kind of like about, you know, in terms of music, you have music that might be about church, which can be inspiring, and then this can be like hyper, you know, sexualized music. But I just think it's interesting that so everybody might be listening to the music. Does previous trauma impact even the way we hear the music, right? I think that's one thing for us to be looking at in terms of freedom of expression, right? Does that make sense? I see you looking at me kind of crazy, Chanel, like, what in the world are you talking about?
No, I'm not.
I think the music lands differently. And that was the thing that somebody wrote. How do you talk about this to young girls? I think young girls need to learn about Jezebel. We need to put our collective brilliance together and find age-appropriate ways of talking to Black girls about how Black people got here and what it means to be a Black girl in a racist society. We need to come up with books that are beautiful but direct about what can happen and how we can keep ourselves safe. We're too brilliant not to have already done it, but now we don't have an excuse, right? Something that they, you know, can grab hold to and feel that's a part of them. All right, Deborah, what you got?
I was about to go. I was about to go with you, Yolanda. You're on mute, Deborah.
Really good questions. I really wish that we could answer all of them.
What did you see that's good? Tell us, what did you see?
One that says, could you please clarify to the audience that under the law, there is a difference between prostitution and sex trafficking. And so I guess, so under the law, they are defining prostitution as the practice of occupation of engaging in sexual activity with someone for payment. And then for sex trafficking, it is when the way that I define sex trafficking, or the way that it's defined by law. Marie, do you have the legal definition? But I just know that it's when a commercial sex act is exchanged by way of force, fraud, and coercion. When the person is under the age of 18, force, fraud, and coercion does not have to be present. Simply because there is a sex act and something is being exchanged as a good, then that is what constitutes that transaction or that instance as sex trafficking. And so in that case, children, minors cannot consent to being to exchange sex for goods. And so anytime that happens, whether there is by way of a trafficker or not, in those instances when there is not a trafficker present, the buyer is seen as the trafficker.
So I just want to say this one thing, and I'm going to go back to something that Chanel said about the term.
Is it a question? What you say? Oh, I'm sorry. What did you say?
I wanted to clarify.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. Go ahead. Who's talking? What's happening?
Deborah.
I just wanted to go back and to Chanel's point in relation to making the distinction between sex trafficking and prostitution. I will also say, going back to her comment about, I would hope that at some point we can do away with the term prostitution. Sometimes making the distinction about that is about who's worthy and who's not worthy of help and assistance. So keep those things in mind as we go forward with that too. But thank you for Chanel for sharing with us the distinction between sex trafficking and prostitution. Some of the other questions that are here.
Let's just get one question. We're not going to be able to get all of the questions. Just give us one thing that we can.
I'm just going through the questions as you want to.
Okay.
There's a problem with the language using prostitution on kids. I do believe that there is something called sex work, at least in other countries, in which which is different as sex trafficking. And that was just I think that was a comment. Right.
Go ahead, Chanel.
No, I was just gonna coin just a statement that I heard from another survivor, is that the sex trade is a condition of oppression and not a condition of our liberation. A lot of the times when we hear sex workers, they speak from a liberating stance, but a lot of the times they fail to really unpack and truly see the sex trade for what it truly is historically, how it has brought harm to women and girls. And it is a condition of our oppression and not a condition of our liberation. And so, although other countries may identify sex work as work, I do not.
Next question. How can white women ally with Black women to rewrite these perceptions and be advocates?
Can you say that again?
She said, I'll repeat it. So she said, I'm clearer right now for some reason. She said, how can white allies assist us in, all of this work? I forgot the last few words. What was it?
Perceptions.
The perceptions, yeah. I have so much to say about that, but I'm gonna let y'all go. Well, I'll start, and then you can just piggyback on whatever I have to say, okay? So one of the things that I think is so important, especially with white women, in so many ways, historically, white women have been given a pass because white women have a minority status too, but white women are in a unique position in that they tend to give birth to all of the members of the dominant group, right? And we also have that history, 300 plus years of enslavement, 89 years of Jim Crow, and what many people call 67 years of new Jim Crow and this kind of freedom, right? So the question has to be asked, white women, what was your role in all of this historical trauma, right? And so I think white women should be asking themselves, in what ways do I still internalize Jezebel, Mammy, and Sapphire in the way that I look at Black women? particularly in the workforce. Mammy is about this idea that Black women's role is to support white women, to support white families, to support white people. And so many people think that our lack of visibility in leadership has to do with us not being seen as leading, but as support for white women. And I think that there's some real kind of introspective work that white women have to do to partner with Black women, including feeling their way back to what it took for us to survive 300 years of enslavement, 89 years of Jim Crow, and now 67 years of some indifference.
I also think, well, yeah, I was just gonna add, I also think that understanding the privilege, that the certain level of privilege that you do carry as a white woman, and using that privilege to help to make space, to make space for other Black women. And when we do step up into those leadership roles, finding what your, how you can support and the different things that you can do. And you're right, Yolanda, it is going to take a lot of introspection and a lot of introspective work to be done, because think about it, how would you want to be supported? How would you want, what kind of help do you think you would need? And whatever it is as a white woman, whatever kind of help you think you would need, turn that help towards us.
Janelle, did you want to say something about that?
No.
No is a complete sentence.
It is.
No. Just listen. I think we need you guys to listen to us. Allow us to be in partnership with you and see us as your equal and not as someone who's helping you, but as someone that, our voices are just as valuable as yours. Our expertise is just as valuable. And through your privilege, I think that a lot of the times white women can just partner with us and see us as their equal.
Anything? Is there another one?
Yes, other questions?
I saw one question really quick. We were going to, we talked about it, but it was about what can the churches do?
Speak to that.
The role of the
Speak
church.
to that. Who wants to go with the church first? Janelle, come on. Come on.
Like for me, I will say that in my journey through healing, a lot of the healing journey for me started within the church. But what I have learned along the way is that a lot of the times church, they chastise and judge us and judge women and girls. And it's not they victim blame, and they put all of the responsibility of the abuse that we have experienced on us and not on the perpetrator. So I think what role can the church do is to be more educated about what sex trafficking is and to stop with the victim blaming and the judgment and the chastisement. Because even in my own healing journey, I was like re-traumatized because it was so bombarded on me that this was my fault, that this was something that I chose, and that, I failed to do something wrong. When in fact, I did not fail to do anything wrong. I was preyed on. And that without me ever coming into contact with the trafficker, I would have never been trafficked. And it wasn't because of my vulnerability or something that I failed to do. I simply met a trafficker and I was trafficked as a result. And I think that we just need to really shift the narrative on what the help really needs to look like, and that it's not about us needing to be saved, but that we need to be supported, we need to be listened to, and we need to be empowered.
Marie, did you want to say something?
Yeah, Chanel hit on so many good points. The points that were coming up for me was the judgment that you can typically find in a church, and it's very unfortunate because instead of being a place of refuge and help, a lot of people feel judged and they feel cast out and they feel marginalized even in the church setting, and so it does further push people away. And like Chanel was saying earlier, when you push people away, the streets are waiting, and they're waiting there with open arms. And a lot of times when they do, when the messaging is just reinforced in someone's head. See, we told you that that was going to happen if you did X, Y, Z. So really, yes, the church can work to be more educated, work to be more non-judgmental, because that's the way that you're gonna, that's the way that you're gonna reach the hearts of individuals, with kindness, with love, not with judgment. That's not going to bring anybody. That's not going to bring anybody in.
You know, it's such an interesting conversation for me because I am kind of out as an agnostic. But as my healing, I did a lot of work in EMDR, and I used to recommend the EMDR to everybody, and now I don't. So I recommend it, but it's very, 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 very hard work. But what I want to say about that is the more I treated my trauma, these songs, this is not personal. This is not what happens to you if you work on trauma. This is what happened to me because I was brought up in the church. These songs, it seemed like it came after me, right? And so I would be sitting and something like, I need thee, oh, I need thee. And even though I wasn't talking about God, it was something so relatable. Right? Or do 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 do. You ever heard that? Do 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 do. Right? And so all that stuff started coming back to me so for me, even though I'm not a Christian, I claim spirituals. I claim gospel. And those things really infuse my healing. What I'm not for is patriarchy. So I think that the church has extraordinary capacity, especially churches that have ministers who are committed to healing. There is so much that can be used in Christianity in terms of being still and knowing, and let your gentleness be evident to all, that could be an aid in the transformation of those of us who are in pain. But like you said, if we're playing respectability politics and stuff like that, that's really nasty, because what we want to do is lift people up. But the church, oh, what potential. I want to reach out to church women who are in church that have power, who are touching other Black women, and I want to really help them help us.
And I'll just make one last point about the church. A lot of the times I do believe that the churches just need a lot of more training so that they can just be aware of what trafficking really looks like. In my own personal experience, my trafficker used the Bible as a tool. And he used to say that, God created me to be a hoe, and that he justified it because prostitution was in the Bible. And so he just said, this was my part to play on the earth, and then I needed to be good at it. He would say things like, the colors of purple and gold representing royalty, and that we wore it as a sign to resemble royalty. And he quoted it, dated it back to purple equating to royalty in the Bible. And so a lot of the times when we meet and come into contact with the victim or a survivor after they've gone through this, the level of confusion that they have on what they've endured has to be factored into how we support survivors of trafficking.
So we only have like 10 more minutes. We can take one more question from you, Deborah, and then we'll have some closing statements from the panel.
Okay, so I'm going to get to this one. Many adult prostitutes began their commercial sexual exploitation before they were 18. Using legal definitions, they started sex trafficking victims had no way to break the cycle, continued as prostitutes because they were 18. Can you speak to that? Those that come into at a younger age, that when they come into it, they were trafficked, but now they're sort of labeled as prostitutes once they become
because of their age.
Older. Yes.
I think this question is really just highlighting the very need that the laws that need to be changed to address this issue. The reason why I think one day my hope is that we would do away with the term prostitution, because again, it just takes away the responsibility to care. It implies a level of choice when that is not the case. There's so much more to a person's story, to a person's journey, and we generalize it. And so because we choose to coin this label of prostitution, we miss the mark. And that question, just to me, it just highlights how we are continuing to miss the mark. Because again, like you said, we see it all the time where someone they're trafficked as a minor and then they become an adult, but now that they're an adult, instead of them receiving proper services and care, they're now being criminalized. And that's not okay.
Marie, did you want to say something about that?
No, I was just thinking, and that's just all because of a change in, that's the difference that 1 year makes from 17 to 18. The difference that word makes, that verbiage is incorrect. And it does not, like Chanel was saying, they're trying to make it appear as though that there's choice involved. And really, we're looking at someone that is being victimized still, who is still in need of the same services that they needed when they first began being victimized in their young years. And so if they had ever gotten the true services that they needed, maybe they wouldn't be in the same situation. Maybe they wouldn't be driven to the same situation now, because a lack of services and a lack of providing those needs will perpetuate the cycle.
Mm-hmm. You have one more?
Okay. So one of them was asking about what can we do with parents. So is there any work going on with parents who are using their children to support their drug habits through trafficking? And what are we doing to intervene with that, if anything at all, and what you all have seen in relation to that?
Marie?
I was going to let Chanel lead. I know that. Chanel, I'm going to defer to you on that one, because I know that you.
Yeah, that's such a complex question. I can only just speak from just the experiences that I have seen and kind of supported other survivors through. And we are seeing the parents being prosecuted. Your role as a parent is to care and provide and nurture and protect your child. And for you to, fail to do that, I think it's important for you to be held accountable for your actions. I think it's very complex, because we may have to get into the history of that parent and what that parent has gone through, what they have endured, their traumas, and all of that. But at the very end of it, we're now talking about a child whose life is forever going to be changed because of a parent failing to maybe not have resources, or not see those resources be available to them. But again, in those instances, the parents are, they're being identified as traffickers and they're being prosecuted.
Mm-hmm. And because I just want to say this, it's structurally, I just feel like if we stay away from enslavement and we just look at Jim Crow, there has been so much sexual exploitation in this country, so much violence, so much torture. Where do we think that energy went? We've got to process that. We need individual and collective processing. And so a lot of this nasty has just been passed down and passed down and passed down. It's been passed down to all of us, regardless of color, but it has been passed down uniquely for Black people. And we have to acknowledge that. We have to acknowledge those 300 years of rape and torture and exploitation. It's terrible. It's terrible. And yes, there are some really bad behaviors in the African-American community. And there's no excusing that away. But I think we need multi-lenses as we begin to grapple with that.
So I'm going to wrap it up with this last thing that followed up on what a question or a statement that Chanel just mentioned about the trauma of the families. and that we don't often take in consideration the trauma of the families and what they're going through and resources that we're providing to them. We can see and we can very easily criminalize them in terms of what they're doing, but let's talk about also the trauma of those families. And Chanel, you started on that conversation about talking about just the trauma that the families are going through as well.
Yeah, I was just saying that it's just very complex and a lot of it is generational. The substance abuse, a lot of times I can only just speak to the situations that I have witnessed and seen myself. It was generational. So it didn't just start with the family that I was working with. This went back to grandfather, his parents, and it just continues to show us, you know, what harm this has done to our communities.
I agree. Even to Yolanda's point, just going back from, again, the 300 years and the ways that our community has coped. And so a lot of it, like you were saying, Yolanda, the behaviors have been bad as we've learned to cope, and some of the coping mechanisms have been unhealthy. And we have to, as a community, we have to collectively heal. We have to get to a place where we are, because we are dealing with families who have that generational trauma, and it's being passed down from one generation to the next. And so really where I feel like a lot of the times that we're able to help and to come in is to really just interrupt that cycle. Because really it needs a hard reset. And that does take working with the family as a whole. Even if we have survivors that wind up, and I'm speaking more of underage survivors that wind up leaving the home, if we're not addressing the issues that are in the home, they're being, put back into the same environment. And a lot of the times there is trauma that needs to be addressed in the family or within the family. So I believe that where that support comes in for even the parents and working with the parents, it's very complex. And even when working with them, we need to understand the traumas and understand how to work with them in a non-judgmental way as well.
And the fact that they may not believe that they are traumatized.
True.
May not even identify as somebody that's being traumatized.
Or believing that you should get help if you are traumatized.
Mm-hmm.
That's true.
So, this is my last word. I, as Chanel was saying earlier, I am really excited for African-American women in this green zone. I love, Chanel, that you kept talking about care, because Michelle Alexander, in her book, The New Jim Crow, her basic summary was mass incarceration is a lot about the failure to care. And so I think that us being here today is symbolic of our hearts. And I'm just really excited that I was able to play a part in it.
So as we wrap this up, thank you so much to our panelists, our moderator, for all the questions. I see a lot of people hoping that we will continue this conversation and that we'll have more opportunities to share. Following up, those who've been registered for the webinar will receive our statistical information and all the data that we have. We'll also keep you all apprised of any follow-up webinars and trainings we'll have on this issue and other issues related to women going forward this year. Thank you all so very much for joining us on this perspective on the impact of human trafficking on Black women and girls. Thank you all very much.
Namaste.
Thank you.
Thank you.